The presidential pardon was designed as a safety valve to prevent political conflict from boiling over into rebellion or revolutionary violence. George Washington used it to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. The framers defended it explicitly for that purpose. Donald Trump used it to pardon the people who carried out his insurrection. And here's the really uncomfortable part. What he did is almost certainly legal. I generally try on this channel to focus on conduct by American and global leaders that is outwardly illegal. Conduct that violates statutes, constitutional provisions, or clearly established legal rules. There is no shortage of that material when it comes to Donald Trump. But this episode is different, and that difference matters. The presidential pardon power did not originate in the United States, and it did not originate as a democratic institution. It comes from English constitutional practice, specifically the royal prerogative of mercy. The king, as the source of all criminal justice, possessed the authority to forgive offenses against the crown. That power was broad, discretionary, and political. Courts did not review it, and they never have. The purpose was practical. The law is rigid, but politics are volatile. Mercy functioned as a relief valve, especially after a rebellion or political unrest, allowing the sovereign to restore stability without further bloodshed. That idea is not just abstract theory for me. Insurrection and political violence sit at the core of my academic background and my professional experience in national security and federal prosecution. So when the framers talk explicitly about clemency as a tool to diffuse rebellion, I take that seriously. But history has shown the danger of abusing the pardon power. After the excesses of the Stuart kings, particularly Charles I and Charles II, Parliament moved to restrain the pardon power, most notably by barring its use to defeat impeachments. One of those kings ultimately lost his head, Charles I. And I'm not suggesting that modern American politics should resolve itself that way, but the lesson was unmistakable. When executive power is openly converted to personal advantage, political systems eventually respond. The people eventually respond. When this model crossed the Atlantic, it crossed largely intact. Colonial governors exercised the pardon power as standard executive function. After independence, Americans distrusted royal prerogative, but they did not abandon the idea of clemency. Experiments with legislative pardons and executive councils failed. The Constitution made a deliberate choice. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution vests the pardon power in a single president, with one explicit limitation. It does not extend to impeachments, the same restraint that Parliament put on the king after the Stuarts. Hamilton's defense of the pardon power in Federalist 74 is explicit. The power must be decisive, personal, and insulated from judicial review. That insulation was intentional. It was a feature of the system, not a bug. And the Federalist Papers are clear about one of the central purposes of this power, to serve as that safety valve in moments of political unrest when passions run high and the risk of insurgency or revolutionary violence threatens the stability of the public. George Washington put this into practice. After the Whiskey Rebellion, he pardoned many of the participants. He did it because the insurrection had failed, order had been restored, and the country needed to move on under legitimate authority. Clemency served as a method of reconciliation, but not self-protection, and that distinction mattered. This is where Donald Trump enters the fray. Again, this is one of those uncomfortable moments where precision matters. What Trump is doing with the pardon power is almost certainly legal. It falls squarely within his constitutional authority, and it is almost certainly non-justiciable. The courts cannot review the motives behind his pardons, cannot weigh their wisdom, and cannot invalidate them because they appear to be corrupt. And again, that insulation is intentional. But legality does not equate to legitimacy. A recent House report analyzing more than 1,700 Trump clemency actions makes the pattern unmistakable. Trump has pardoned almost all of the participants in the January 6th insurrection, the very event that he himself encouraged, incited, and benefited from politically. This is clearly not the George Washington model, and it's clearly not the intent outlined in the Federalist Papers. It is something else entirely. That same House report reveals other telling patterns. Trump's pardons were overwhelmingly granted to white people, dramatically out of proportion to both the federal prison population and the communities most burdened by mass incarceration. Clemency, the supposed remedy for systemic injustice, was not supposed to be used that way. It's one thing for Gerald Ford to pardon Richard Nixon so the country can move forward under new leadership. It's another thing entirely for a president to pardon the people he used as instrumentalities of his own coup attempt to remain in power. Clemency was designed to cool political violence, not to reward it. And it certainly was not intended to retroactively immunize the president's own insurgent base. And among the relatively small number of women that Trump has pardoned, A majority, an overwhelming majority, were convicted of obstructing other women's access to health care, including violations of federal laws protecting reproductive health clinics. Mercy was extended not to women harmed by the system, but to those who used force and intimidation against others exercising constitutional rights. That is not mercy as a risk mitigation strategy. It is mercy as an ideological tool. Taken together, these choices reveal something deeper than partisanship. They reveal the commoditization of clemency. Pardons under Donald Trump have become a currency used to reward loyalty, ideological alignment, racial proximity, and political utility. The office of the presidency has become a clearinghouse for graft. In making the pardon power non-justiciable, the Constitution assumed the good faith of the presidents that we elect. It assumes that reputational costs matter. It assumes that presidents will hesitate to use lawful powers in ways that openly degrade the institution itself. When those assumptions fail, the guardrails disappear. To be perfectly honest, I am not aware of any clean remedy for what's going on right here. Judicial review is foreclosed by design. Criminal law strains to reach constitutionally authorized acts. Impeachment is political and episodic. The system relies in critical places on norms rather than enforceable rules. This is what Donald Trump has exposed, again. Not a loophole, but a structural vulnerability in our 250-year-old Constitution. The pardon power was designed to reconcile a nation after unrest. Trump demonstrated that it can also be used to reward an unrest that he himself created. That use is lawful, but it is simultaneously the opposite of what the power was designed for. History suggests that when law alone cannot correct that kind of abuse, politics eventually will. What form that correction takes and how destructive it becomes is not something constitutional text can control. Donald Trump has, somewhat amazingly, exposed the risk of building a constitutional system that depends on good faith. He's also showing us what happens when that system collapses.